Hello and welcome to the 44th episode of the Creative Yarn Entrepreneur Show. I am your host, Marie Segaris, and welcome everybody and thanks for joining me. Today's episode is a live Google Plus Hangout, and the topic that we're focusing on is getting the most out of Ravelry as a yarn-related business owner. So I think many of us, we probably started using Ravelry as a fan, as somebody who enjoyed, yarn and knitting and crocheting, and maybe we aren't as familiar with the features of Ravelry that we can actually use for our business. So just to get started, I've put a little note in the chat. If it's your first time in a Google Hangout, what you'll see is in your upper right corner, there'll be a little blue box with some lines in it. That's the chat. So you can click on that. And if you have any questions or things that you want to ask, you can do that there. And also if you could introduce yourself as you come on in, that would be great. So like I said, in today's episode, I'm going to be kind of walking through some of the features of Ravelry you might want to use for your business. So what I'm going to do first actually is just give a little bit of an overview of Ravelry, because I think maybe you're not that familiar with it in general. So basically, what Ravelry is it's a social network for crocheters and knitters, and it is really, most of the features are actually only for people who log in, but there are some features that the public can see. One of those features is descriptions of patterns, or what they call pattern pages. Members can choose to make some of the other pages public. So for example, you can choose to have projects that you create on Ravelry be public, so you can kind of use that as a portfolio. And there are also some yarns that have chosen to have their yarn information public as well. So there's a reasonable amount of public information, but most of it is kind of hiding behind a login. And for that reason, a lot of people that actually aren't users of Ravelry aren't all that familiar with what's going on, because if you don't log in, you really can't see most of the features at all or use them. So what I'm going to do to start is just kind of do a screen share and show some of the basic features of Ravelry. And then I'm going to get to some of the questions about how you could use it as a creative business owner. And I have a couple of questions here that people sent in advance. And of course, anyone that's listening or watching right now, if you have questions, please do feel free to share those in the chat. So I'm going, let me first, I guess I should share my screen before I start doing everything. So I'm going to share my screen now. And so what you're going to see here is that basically this is what Ravelry looks like when you very first log in. So when you very first log in, what you're going to see is this kind of home page, which has right here sort of a stream of information from their blog. There's a quick search, there's a help section, and there's some tips that they share. Up at the top is your name. Your Ravelry name will be highlighted, and that's where you can play around with your profile. There's your notebook, and when you touch on that, you see there's projects, hand spun. So for those of you that are spinners, you can actually keep track of your hand spun yarn. Stash, which is where you would list all of your, your projects that your yarns that you have in your own personal stash. Queue, which is a place that you can sort of say, oh, this is the pattern that I plan to make in the future, and I can match the pattern with some yarn if I'd like. And this is favorites. You can favorite almost anything on Ravelry, and I'll show you how to organize those. Friends. On Ravelry, you can add people to be your friends. You don't need their permission, so that's something to keep in mind. And once they're in your friends, you can kind of organize them, and you can track some of the things that they're doing. So it's a great way to keep an eye on potentially your competitors as a business owner. There's groups and events. You can also note the needles and hooks in your collection, and in library you can put the patterns in your collection. There's a private messaging system, and then there's these blog posts, which allows you to link blog posts that you've written from your own blog to patterns and projects and other things on Ravelry. So this is kind of a thing that everyone has here. Patterns is the pattern database, and we'll go a lot into that in a moment, so I don't want to feature it right now. Same thing, yarns is a yarn database. People, that's where your friends and other folks show up. Forums is really where these groups take place. So groups is a way, it's a little confusing. It shows you the groups that you're in and allows you to search for groups. But forums is really the place where you can hang out with your different group forums. And you know, if you have a small business, you definitely might want to consider starting your own forum or group, because that's a great way, you know, to kind of connect with your fans. Then there's this shop area. This is for shopping to buy Ravelry stuff. It's not for you to buy, other people to buy your patterns. There's this question mark, which is your help, search, which we're going to get a lot into, and pro. So if you are a designer and you're selling patterns on here, you'll have this pro tab, and it'll allow you to keep track of your sales and other things like that. So that's just kind of a general overview of what Ravelry offers. And right now we're just on my project page for a moment because I was just checking to make sure that nobody's having trouble getting in. So usually you'll see that periodically I'll be kind of clicking around because I always want to make sure that everybody that wants to join isn't having any difficulty getting in. So let's talk a little bit about your profile, and I'm going to click on my own profile and walk through the items. So when you set up, you come up with a username, and you can change it, but I'm not sure how many times. I know there's kind of a limit. And you can edit your profile. Now, Ravelry does allow you to have multiple accounts. So if you are someone who wants to keep your personal Ravelry profile separate from your business Ravelry profile, you can do that. Personally, the size of my business isn't really large enough to justify that. But if you are keeping one account, of course, you want to keep in mind that anything you say is you know, automatically representing your brand, even if you're kind of personally chatting. You have the option for sharing your first name here. You don't have to. And actually, one thing I should mention is all of these elements, none are required. So you can just have no name. It'll tell you when you joined. You can choose whether you want people to know if you're online or not. You can choose if you want to add a website or blog. You can choose if you want to put your location, your birthday. All of these things are optional. They're not required. This is also an area where you can see all of those things that we talked about in the notebook at a glance. So you can see all of your projects, your queues, your favorites, your friends, your stash, your handspun, your library, your posts, all of that kind of together here. And if you're a designer, it will show your design, you know, your Ravelry designer page. If you're a yarny, it'll say my yarns here. And if you have patterns for sale in Ravelry, that will also be there. And then if you have a website that's updated regularly or not, this will show kind of the regular, you know, the home page. Or if your website is primarily a blog and there's no home page, it'll show kind of the latest posts. And then here we'll show some featured designs that you've made, and from your projects, featured objects. To be honest, I'm not quite sure how these get picked. I mean, I've had these same featured objects up here for ages, so I don't know, you know, what's the selection criteria, if it's based on how many comments or who knows. But anyway, they've chosen some random number of your projects to show here. And in the About Me section, if you are a business, of course, I would strongly recommend optimizing that section by sharing a lot of details about yourself and your business, and you can put as many links as you'd like. So I think that's really important too, is to use those links. Something else you can do in your section here is you can link to almost all of your social profiles. There's actually more options in this that I'm not part of, but when people come to your page, they can find wherever else you are as well. So again, let's say you have a business where you sell yarn on Etsy. You know, if you don't have your Etsy shop easy to get to, that's really not going to help people, you know, kind of migrate over to make that purchase. And similarly, if you have put the RSS feed for your blog, all of your recent blog posts, and I think this shows about 20, will be posted here in order, which is great. And you can also link posts, as I mentioned. All the groups that you're a member of that have a logo will be showing up on the side. And you can see I'm in a lot of groups, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. If they don't have a logo, it'll just be this kind of link thing here. And so you can see some of the many groups that I am a member of. And so that's kind of your, your profile. And again, you can edit this at any point. You can edit it as often as you'd like. So that's sort of the beginning stage. I think if you're going to have a business and you want people to be aware of it, you definitely want to highlight your profile. You want to do things in your profile that will really kind of draw attention to the fact that you have a yarn related business. So that's the first step, I think, is optimizing your profile. And again, you can change that right here where it says edit your profile. And as I've mentioned, even other things that are options, you can choose if you want to let people chat with you, all this kind of stuff. And you can put, let me just link on the add or change social sites so you can see there's quite a few. So if you actually have a store front, you can link to Yelp, for example. If you're on Reddit, you can link to that. So I mean, there's a lot of different Instagram, there's a lot of different options here. Now, one thing I should mention is a lot of times I go to people's Ravelry pages and I click on Etsy and the link is wrong. And the reason for that is a lot of people think you need to put your full Etsy account or your full Facebook address, and it's actually just the username. So if you are going to use this link to social sites, I highly recommend, strongly, highly, super duper recommend that you check the links to make sure they work and that you understand how you're linking, because it's very frustrating for people to click on the link and go to your site and then it's not really linking to your site, and then they have to do all this extra work. If you're trying to promote your business, you want to limit the extra work that people are doing as much as you can. So, and then as I said here, you can change your profile description. You can add pictures and links and quoted text and video and all kinds of stuff. So that's something that's really great too, if that fits with your business model. So that's kind of the first step, I think, of getting your, optimizing Ravelry for your business, is making sure your profile lets people know that you have a business. Okay. So now there's a couple other things about specific businesses. So if you are a crochet designer or a knitting designer or a loom knitting designer, and all of these types of patterns can be included on Ravelry, what you'll want to do is link your account to your designer page, and that's where you see here how I have my designs. So I'm just going to show you my designer page. So you can use by default, it'll use the same information from your profile, but I would actually recommend customizing this section, and here's why. If you want it to be viewed by the public, so in other words, not someone who's logged into Ravelry, you'll need to customize this. If it's just pulling from your profile, it'll actually by default be private, so that when a person who isn't a Ravelry member or isn't logged in goes to your designer page, there won't be kind of any information about you here. So I would recommend customizing this so that you can share it with people that aren't Ravelry members, because you want those people to see and buy your patterns as well. So once you go to your designer page, and you can see I have more information here, I can edit it, I can add patterns, can get an overview of your patterns, your bundles, user activity, which shows you what people are doing with your patterns. So you can see who's queued it, you can see who's favorited it, you can even see who's made a finished project if you want to take a look at their pictures maybe. So there's a lot of different stuff. So you can see here somebody just is working on a current shawl that I'm doing, and you can see that her post is in progress rather. You can see her project page with all of her pictures. I could add it to favorites if I'd like. I could say something nice like, wow, that looks great. You can also read the feedback about what the person has said about your pattern. So that's always a little bit challenging for some folks, but anyway, that's something you can do there. So again, there's this element of user activity. Then your pattern store is the patterns that you have for sale. You can also find in here any pattern that you're giving away as a free Ravelry download. So if you have patterns that are, for example, published in a book, or you have patterns that are for free on your website, for example, those will not show up in your pattern store. Your pattern store is really just focused on things that are available as Ravelry downloads specifically. So the top section will be ebooks or collections that you've put together, and the bottom section will be individual patterns. And to be honest, I have really no clue how these are organized. At first, I always thought it was alphabetical, but I see that it isn't, and maybe it's by time, like the oldest one, but sometimes it seems to be a little bit out of order. So I don't really know how that's organized. Here on editors, you can assign and allow people to edit your work. So for example, if you have a publisher that you're working with regularly, you might want them to put in your patterns because it saves you some work. So you might want to add them. You can choose here if you're looking for assistance, not looking for assistance, or no preferences. And you can see here if there's any problems. So flag would be if somebody decides that it's not, there's a problem. And this gives you a quick overview of how many projects you have for each pattern of yours. And the green check mark means that you have approved the pattern, meaning that the description of the pattern is complete to your standards. So you can see that I forgot to approve some here. It can also show you who entered it. So if you can see, I have had several magazines that do the work of adding it for me, yay. So you can see that they are the people that actually go ahead and add those patterns. And then Manage Store will bring you to this Pro tab, which we'll get into later. So this is all very exciting if you're a designer, but how in the world do you get this page? Well, what you need to do is have a pattern that already exists on Ravelry, and then you have to contact Ravelry and say, please connect me with this pattern, and make it that connection between me, the user, and this designer. It doesn't happen automatically. And that usually, in my experience, takes about a day or two. And so you may be wondering, well, how do I add a pattern if I'm not a designer already and I don't have this wonderful add pattern button? Well, what you do is on the left where it says My Notebook, you're going to click on that, and you'll actually get an extra even though there's this drop down under My Notebook with all this information, when you click on it, there's actually even more options. And one of the options is called Contributions. And so for contributions, you can contribute a pattern to Ravelry that you designed, or a pattern that someone else designed. So let's say you're reading a book and you love this pattern, you find it's not in the Ravelry database, you might want to put it in there. You can add a yarn to Ravelry. And by the way, the process of becoming an official yarny in Ravelry is very similar. You have to add a yarn first. So you have to say, this is my yarn that I dye or spin or paint or whatever it is. And then people can have the option of, once you've set up that yarn so it exists on there, then you can link it. Now, some people may be sort of behind the times on Ravelry, and you might find that your fans have already added you. So your fans have already decided that they are interested in, putting your yarns in there. So you might actually find a yarn that's already in there and then contact Ravelry using this kind of little question mark help and say, hey, I'd like to be a yarny. Okay, but either way, that's how you add the first stuff yourself if you haven't actually made that linkage yet between you as the designer or yarny. And in this same Contribute to Ravelry section, you'll see adopted patterns, adopted yarns, adopted items. So as I mentioned when I was going through the pattern page, or rather the designer page, that you could allow people to be an editor, you can also choose to be an editor for someone else. And this is something you might do voluntarily, or maybe you're working with another company in a paid capacity, and part of that includes editing their patterns and yarns. So far as I'm going along, I can see there's a few people listening in. Does anyone have any questions? If you do, please, type them in the upper left-hand corner of the Google Hang. You'll see a little blue icon with some lines on it. That's the chat. So you can just type in your question there, or if you'd like, you can even turn on your microphone and ask a question. So that's kind of another phase that I've mentioned is getting your own information if you're a designer or you're a yarny, making sure the information is accurate and correct. Why is this important? Well, let's say a fan enters in your yarn. You know, they bought it at a yarn market and want to enter it into Ravelry so they can add it into their stash, but that person isn't the most detail oriented. So maybe they've left out some of the incredible features of your yarn. And so now somebody else coming along to it on Ravelry, they're not going to get the full information that you as the yarny would kind of put in there. So I think that's, you know, the other reason why you want to really try to maximize your page there, is because when you write the information yourself, you can have it written in the voice of your business. Let's talk about another feature that I think is really helpful, whether you're a designer or a yarny, or you have some other kind of business that isn't kind of officially supported by Ravelry. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're a maker. So you make finished crochet or knit projects or woven projects, and you are selling those somewhere else. Well, you can't get, you can't get a designer page and you can't get a yarny page. So, what's the point? Well, there's still a lot of ways you can share that information. And even though there's tons of crocheters and knitters on Ravelry, they're actually not, everyone that's on here doesn't do both. So for instance, you might be making finished knit projects, and someone who only crochets might be willing to buy those because they don't know how to knit, and similarly, someone who only knits, and can't crochet might be interested in buying your crochet items either for themselves or as gifts because they, are interested in handmade and so on. So if you look down here where it says, and again, we're still in My Notebook on the left side, and this feature you can get to either from the My Notebook drop down, or once you click on My Notebook on the left, it will say Blog Posts. Now, this is a really cool feature because what happens is any post on your blog that you linked up in your profile page will show up here. And there's a slight delay because, it's working off your RSS feed. So sometimes it might not pop up for a few hours. I'm sure it doesn't refresh every second of the day, even though we'd love it to do that. For every single post, you can link that to either or both a project or a stash item. So again, let's say I'm a maker and I sell finished crochet projects. What I can do is for each one of those projects, I can, for each thing that I'm selling, I can create a project also from the My Notebook tab, and then I can write a blog post about it. So now once my blog post is available, I'm going to click where it says link project or stash under that particular blog post, and I can type in the name of that particular project. They're listed alphabetically, and if you have 300 and something like I do, it's not very helpful. So you can type in and then it'll search. So let's say for this one, there's already a project, but actually here, let me X out the project so you can see how to do this. So I'm going to say link project or stash, and I know the name of the project, so I just type it in and click on it, and you see the project shows up. Now you might say, well, that's a lot of work. What benefit does that give me? Well, let's click onto the project for a moment. Now, since I designed the pattern, I put it in my own, I linked it to my own pattern, but you could link it to someone else. I use tags. These are not required, of course, but I find that often they're helpful. I link always to the yarn. So I never just write in the yarn. I always link it to the brand. And the reason for that is if you work with a yarn company or you are a yarn company, you want to support the yarnies. And the way you can do that is by linking your projects. When you link your project, what happens is that when somebody clicks on that yarn and they're looking for a project to make, all the projects that people have done before will populate there. So I'm going to just click on this yarn to give you an example. So when I go to this yarn, which I use for this project, you can see the details here. And as a yarny, this is the page you definitely want to control the information on. You'd want it to be exactly what you want everyone to know about your yarn. You can see that they have colorways based on what people have entered. So you don't have to list every colorway, but anytime somebody says, I'm using, in this case, Vanna's Choice in number 26 chocolate, that will show up here. So you can see there's 576 people have that right now in their stash, and 2,083 people have projects made with number 26 chocolate. So that's great. Then you can put your own photos. Buying options, you can, if there's a place that is selling it online or local, they'll show it here. But this is really a cool part. You can see everyone who stashed the yarn in their own stash and what they say about it, of course. But this is the feature that I'm trying to show people, pattern ideas. If people have linked their pattern page to the yarn, what it will do is it will show kind of in order the projects, or sorry, the patterns with the most projects in that yarn. So in this case, it's the owl hat by Sarah Zimmerman from Repeat Crafter Me. So you can see there's 378 projects of that hat using Lion Brand Vanna's Choice. Now, how does this help you if you're not a yarny? If you're a yarny, it's obvious. Every time you put in a project, you're making it easier for people to find something to make with it. Now, this might seem bizarre, but when a designer goes into their designer page and they set up a new pattern and they list that particular yarn, it does not automatically show up here unless there's a project in it, which is why as a designer, it's really important for you to link your yarn if you want to support the yarn company. But as a yarny, if you're making projects with your own yarn, it's also the reason you want to link up to the pattern that you're using, because it makes it more likely that if someone comes across your yarn for the first time and they're like, what do I make with this? You know, there's going to be some options here. Now, most of us that are yarnies are not making a yarn like Lion Brand Vanna's Choice. So usually you're making maybe a hand spun or hand dyed, and for a lot of people, those are harder to find a project for. So people that are kind of new to hand spun, new to you know, hand dyed or hand painted yarns, they might be saying, well, gosh, I don't know what to make with this. So this feature is really important. And if you can get your designers that you work with or yourself to link up to patterns, that's going to be super helpful for people. So anyway, back to my project over here. You can do this thing here, shared public. Automatically, like I said, everything on Ravelry is kind of private. So the sort of default is only Ravelry or something like that. But you click on this and you can make it public. Now, why would you want to do that? I'm going to just show you for a moment my Ravelry projects page. I'm going to log out for a moment, and I want you to see what it looks like to kind of everyone in the world that isn't logged in. You can see all my projects here. Now, let's say you are a maker. Again, this is, and you do a lot of custom orders, for example. This would be a great one-shot profile for you to send people. You know, you might be selling on Etsy, but let's be honest, it's sometimes a little bit hard to find stuff on Etsy. And also when people are on Etsy, they can start looking at other shops and not be only on your shop. So let's say you have someone saying, you know, I'd really like to, you know, for you to make this design on me, or sorry, for you to make this project for me. Can I see some of your work? You can use this page almost as a portfolio because it just has a little thumbnail of each picture and of each project, and you control what the main picture is for each project. So you can see I have quite a few that are top secret. These are usually ones that I'm making for third-party publishing, but you know, my older patterns are pretty much all showing up because, you know, those have already been published. But so this is my point here, is that this page can be used as a kind of calling card or portfolio. If you're a contract crocheter or knitter, if you are someone that, again, is a maker and you're doing certain types of custom projects, you could show, you know, a couple of examples in different colors. It's a great sort of one-time portfolio shot. It's also great if you are a new designer or a new first-time, you know, you haven't been published before and you want to submit to third-party publication, because you can show them some of the work you've done, because they might say, well, you know, you've never published before, but if they can see the quality of your work, they may be more likely to actually say, okay, this person really knows what they're doing. So that's another feature. Let me sign back in here. Any questions, by the way, at this point in the show about either any of the features that I've shown already or any features that I haven't shown that you'd like to see more about? Please feel free to write it in the notes. So I'm actually going to turn for a moment to a question that was shared with me in advance. And hold on, I'm going to get my notebook here. This is from Anita Bose Natarajan, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Anita. And she has two great questions. The first one is, how does one get more exposure on Ravelry as an unknown designer? And I think that is a great question, and something that, you know, all unknown designers are wondering about. So the first thing that I mentioned is absolutely make sure that your patterns are also projects. So I'm going to give an example here of this is a pattern that I have recently published, the picnic basket shawl. I'm going to click on the pattern, and you can see that I've linked the project to my own pattern. So when I go to the pattern page, when you see this, that there's 61 projects, I'm going to be one of these 61 projects. Okay, so you can see kind of all the projects there, including the one that I made. So when I very first put it up, of course, there's no other projects but mine. So, but it does help to have it there. Now, why would I want to put in my own project besides to help the yarn company, as I already mentioned? Well, here's another reason. Ravelry is a little bit tricky about sharing. So there's a lot of rules about not oversharing. In general, you can post information, you can cross-post to two different groups on Ravelry without a problem. Some groups allow you to post in other places as well, but in general, to start, you can post it in two places. However, there's an unlimited amount of groups you can share your project with. So here's my project again for my pattern. And here is a list of all the groups that I'm in on the project page. So for those of you that will be listening to the audio later, if you are on a project page and you scroll down on the right side, you'll have this option that says groups, and then under it, share with a group. And this will be a list of all of your groups that you're a member of. Now, I am not active in all these groups. I'm going to just say that right up front. I have no time to be active on 100+ Ravelry groups. But here's how I choose my groups. I choose groups that are based around a yarn that I use often for designing. I choose groups that are based on a project type that I create a lot. So for instance, for me, you'll see a lot of groups related to blankets and afghans and shawls, which are some of my favorite things to make. And I choose local groups. And then I've chosen groups that are craft specific. So Ravelry, if you weren't sure, it's knitting dominated compared to crochet. So I've chosen a couple of specifically crochet groups as well. So now what I can do when my project is done is I can share it with a group. So I've already done this, but it'll just give you an idea. I always share it with my own group, of course, with the yarn company of the yarn that I used. If I bought the yarn physically from a yarn shop and they have a Ravelry group, I share it with them. I share it with any designer groups that I'm a member of. And I also share it with any groups where that project kind of fits in. And now let's look at what happens when you share with a group. So this is 12 Shawls Forever. We'll go visit that group. Once you're on that group's page, you see in the upper right-hand corner, recently shared projects. This right here is a way that you can share your design with more people than Ravelry's kind of don't overshare rule lets you get away with. Because somebody will come to this group, like a big shawl fanatic might be on 12 Shawls Forever a couple times a day, and they'll see your shawl here and they'll be like, oh my God, that shawl is beautiful. Let me see what, let me check it out. They'll click on it, and then it'll tell them the pattern, for example, and the yarn and all that other information that they can then click through to. So if you are the designer or the yarnie, that's great. Or if you're the maker, here's where you can say, this item is for sale in my Etsy shop, and put a link, or I do custom orders of this, or whatever it is that you do. And so that's another way that you can get out your information. You can do the same thing with your stash, which is the yarn that you have in your own stash. So again, if you are a yarnie or you're working with a yarn company and you take some great pictures of your yarn, this is another way, because people will say, hey, what's that cool yarn? They'll click on it and bam, it'll go to that yarn. So it's another way to advertise the yarn. And remember, we linked up that blog post. It'll show blog posts from member projects. So if you have shared the project already in that group, any blog post that you have that is related to that particular project will show up here. So even if you talk about a you know, a design you made 7 years ago and you write a new blog post about it, it can populate to all your groups as long as you have a project page. Now, I just want to say, don't really advocate kind of group spam. And by that, I mean not, you know, just sharing your project with every single group that you're a member of, but rather, you know, choosing carefully the groups that you want to share with. And I think when you do that, it's definitely, you know, this is great. When you share it like kind of tacky sharing, so let's say you're sharing it with a group that's specifically about another designer, or you know, a yarn you didn't use or something like that, it's, you know, it's kind of wasted because you're not really targeting the right audience, and then people start to view you as a spammer. But if it makes sense to put it in that group, then I think, you know, go for it. So that's one way that a newer designer can get attention, is if you, especially if you have great photography and exciting projects, you can do that. Another way is in some of the, what they call the big six. So I'm going to click on the forums tab again. And there are these 6 groups that are called the big 6 that everybody's a member of. To be honest, I don't remember what they all are because I don't really ever frequent them, but 2 of them that I use are needlework news and events, and the other one is patterns. There's one, you know, for the love of Ravelry, and I forget the other ones. And so both of these have a kind of promotional thread, and these are viewed by literally like tens of thousands of people. So I click on, let's say, needlework news and events or patterns, and anytime I come out with a new pattern, I will write a little post about it there. So let me see if I can find one that I recently wrote. So now I'm in this one for needlework news on the net, or needlework on the net, and I'm clicking in the sales promotion post, and now I'm clicking where it says search this topic, and I'm going to write written by Marie in NYC, which is my name, so I can see the post that I last wrote. Okay, so here's one. So I just said, you know, my latest free pattern is this. It's this kind of pattern. Here's where it's available. Just a little intro, and I included a picture. Always include a picture when you can on Ravelry, because, you know, there are so many posts, and if you really want people to be drawn in, definitely put a picture. So once I include that picture, that's another way that people can find me. Now, can I share that picture in other places? Sure. I can share it, like I said, I can share it in posts and 2 groups promoting the pattern. So I can say, hey, this pattern has been released. I usually go with designers, which is a big group. They have a monthly new designs thread. I usually post it there, and I usually post it on one of these. And then some of the groups that I'm a member of, like, let's say crochet shoulder wrappers, which is basically a group for people who love shawls and other kind of crocheted shoulder wrappers, they have a thread that allows you also to post. So you can say, hey, I'm a designer, I'm a member of this group, here's my new pattern. You can usually do that in many of the yarn companies, and they don't necessarily frown on you having already posted in 2 other groups. But of course, always read the rules. So those are other ways. And then, of course, you can share your project without mentioning that it's a pattern. So, and pretty much, you know, you might be in a group that is doing like a crochet along, or you might be in a group that says, hey, share your projects made with this yarn, and you can share your project with that group without necessarily sharing your pattern. And that's another great way to kind of advertise your pattern. A third way is Ravelry advertising. So if you click on the Pro tab, which is on top on the far right, if you click on that, you'll see that there's an option for advertising, active ads, pending ads, performance, reserve ad space. We're going to click on reserve ad space for a moment, and you can just see kind of what the pricing is like. Notebook ads are these sort of they're kind of vertical rectangular ads that are in when you click on your notebook on the far left. Those are $15 a month. So, I mean, it's just a standard fee for a whole month, and you can use that for patterns. You can use that for books. You can use that for yarn. You can use that for supplies. There's a lot of openings there. There's a Ravelry market listing, okay, and that's $5 a month. The forums banner, which is one of my favorites, that is the banner that's at the bottom of the forum. So if you have a forum that's very popular, so for instance, a lot of the shawl groups have a lot of activity and you design shawls, or the blanket groups and you design blankets, or an amigurumi group and you design toys, you can put an ad that appears on the bottom of those groups. And, you know, that's another way for people to find your work. Now, for these ads, they're pretty affordable. And like I said, now where it starts getting more expensive is the featured. So featured knitting pattern, that's the one that when somebody clicks on the sort of opening page of patterns and they want to search for a pattern and they click on knitting, that'll be one that shows up. Featured yarn, same idea, but when they're looking in the yarn database. Group forum banners, these are cheaper than the forums banner, which is for the kind of big six, right? And these are like essentially unlimited. So they're $1.50 for 1,000 impressions, including free same-day repeats. So if the same person sees it multiple times on the same day, you don't have to pay more. These ones actually are the ones that I described before. Sorry about that, as forum banners. I think these are my favorite because you can set really low limits. Like you can say, I want to spend $7 or $5, and then you can up it or down it. You can choose the specific groups that you want to advertise to. So that's really nice. And then the featured crochet pattern, it's priced a lot, just like the other ones. The online logo yarn link, so that's when we looked in the yarn page and it said, you know, hey, here's where you can buy it. They're charging you 25 cents a click to be listed for that, or 15 cents a click if it's just text. And the featured source, it's similar to the featured pattern, except it's like you can use it to go to an ebook instead of, or a book, a physical book, rather than to one particular pattern. And the same idea with the featured product. So those ones are more expensive because they're in more optimal spaces theoretically, but not necessarily if you have more of a niche audience. So that's another way to get exposure, is the advertising. And there's actually a special tier of advertising for local yarn shops as well. So I'm going to kind of go back to Ravelry. So advertising is another way. Those are kind of the main ways that I can think of. And of course, sharing your links to Ravelry outside of Ravelry, because I think a lot of times people, you know, kind of live in Ravelry and, you know, once they leave it, they don't share it. And whereas if you are on other social media platforms and you want to say, hey, I have a new design, if you link to your Ravelry page, of course, that will give you more exposure. And I think it's important to remember that you really have to direct people on what to do. So if you blog about your pattern, literally say, add this to your favorites on Ravelry, you know, and then link to your Ravelry page. Don't expect people to know that it's going to help you if, you know, they add it to your favorites by helping it become more popular. They don't know that. And, you know, it's not really their place to, you know, have to be promoting your business. So that's another way. Are there any other questions from the audience that's here live? If you do, please write them in or feel free to ask them on audio. I'm going to go then to Anita's other question. She says, when do magazines update Ravelry with their patterns to maximize, and the reason she's asking this is because she wants to maximize her time on recently added patterns. So to understand what she's talking about, let's go to the pattern page here for a moment. And you can see these are those ads that we just talked about. You know, there's hot right now. These are like stuff that everyone's clicking on and favoriting and all that kind of stuff right now today. There's also recently added, which to me is not the most optimal way to be seen. It's so far lower, and I don't know if everyone does this, especially on mobile where it's like a lot of scrolling, you know. But let's say it is, I don't know. So how do you get yourself to stay in there? Well, you know, obviously if you post a pattern in an hour that no one's on Ravelry, it'll be on recently added patterns for a longer time. But does that really help you with exposure? I don't think so. In terms of when magazines add patterns, a lot of magazines will add, you know, 30 patterns at once. And so if you happen to add your pattern on the same day, you're going to get bumped off that list. And by the way, I want to mention that I have mine right now set for knit and crochet, my preferences on the pattern page, but it's usually just on crochet. And I don't have any numbers about how that relates to most Ravelers. I don't know if most people have it on their favorite craft or on both, but I would suspect that a lot of people differentiate between the two. And if that's the case, you know, there's maybe a better or a more likely option that you might be seen in one rather than the other. So anyway, to go back to her point, I would say look at the big magazines in your particular craft. So if you're crochet or knitting, and take a peek at their production schedule, because there's certainly not a centralized list of where every magazine goes live, but most magazines, in my experience, they usually try to update either the day that the magazine is out or maybe the day before. And definitely if it's something like, let's say, Knitty, which is a very popular online magazine, you don't want to put your pattern out the same day, your knitting pattern, if you can help it, because it'll just be swallowed in a sea of Knitty. So if you can, I think that's something to avoid, but I personally don't have a list for it. So I would think that's the kind of research you'd need to do on your own, is just take a peek at what are the popular pattern magazines in my niche, whether it's crochet or knitting, and then kind of look at when they've put them. And actually, let me show you how to do that, because that may not always be obvious. So when you go to a pattern, I'm going to go on, click on Pattern Browser and Advanced Search. And right now mine is sorted by recently published, but you have a lot of options. A lot of people search by hot right now, or most popular, which is sort of all-time hot right now, so to speak. Recently published and recently added to Ravelry are not the same thing, by the way. So recently published is things that came out this month, wherever they are. Recently added to Ravelry could be a vintage pattern from 20 years ago that just got put into Ravelry today. So I'm just going to click on this very first pattern here. And if I look, it's the same, right, as my pattern page was before, but this little pencil is not editable to me because I'm not an editor of this pattern. So it's kind of grayed out. But if I click on editing on the far right, I can see the history of all the edits. So I can see when the person put the draft pattern, when they changed the photo, when they officially published it. So if I look on, let's say, Knitty, and I'll do a little search here in patterns. I'm going to search by Knitty and see, let's take a peek at Knitty. This seems to be one. If I go and look at a current knitting pattern, oh wait, that's not, sorry, that's Knitty something else. Anyway, yikes. Okay, sorry, I'm going back to the search. I'm searching Knitty. Oh, it's because I have it on crochet. That's could explain why it's not showing up. Okay, so now I'm going to say again Knitty. And I'm going to look here. This is the Knitty spring issue, Geek Socks. I'm clicking on those. Now, if I go on editing, I can see that they put them on the 11th in the afternoon. They put a draft pattern, and it was published basically right after. So it doesn't look to me that Knitty is the type of place that puts some places I think make the patterns as draft and then release them live on the date of the event. It looks like they put them in on the day that they go live, right? And you can see here, you can see who all their editors are that are allowed to make changes. It looks like actually this designer is the one who put it in herself. So maybe this is not a great example, but if you find out that, let's say, I don't read Knitty, so I honestly don't know, but let's say you find out it comes out on the 15th of the month, and they usually post it a few days earlier, that'll give you an idea. But essentially, Anita, unfortunately, that's kind of research you're going to have to do on your own. I'm so sorry. Okay, so another thing that I haven't talked too much about yet are searches, saved searches, and bundles. And these are great things for doing your own research on Ravelry. So let's go back to my original designs, my designer page. On the top group of tabs, there's one that's called bundles. And this is a way that you can create stuff that makes it easier for people to view your own patterns. So if you look on my pattern page, you'll see these sort of bigger blocks here, and these are bundles that I've set up. Now, I've mentioned before in the show that this year I'm focusing a lot on free patterns. So my first one is free crochet patterns, and these are only patterns available on my site. I actually haven't included other patterns of mine that are available for free elsewhere, because that's strategic, obviously. Then I've put shawls and wraps, crochet for women, blankets and squares. I have one for knitting. So whatever you choose. And this helps people because especially when you have a lot of designs, like I have 162, there's 4 pages. If they say, oh, I like this Marie person, I really want to make something of hers, but I'm looking for, a blanket, maybe they're not all that familiar with searching because, of course, by the way, if you scroll down, you can actually search any designer's designs, but they may not know that. So the best kind of way for them to find them is if you have bundles, and if you arrange the bundles so that, you know, the most prominent ones, the first 4 can show up on the page, those are the ones that you're really trying to emphasize. So maybe they're organized by season or something like that. So bundles are a great way. And basically what you do is you can create a bundle on your own page. You can change order, as I said. Once you have a bundle, you can edit it. You can change the cover, so you can put like your latest pattern as the first pattern. And I think, Anita, these would be helpful because it gives sort of additional viewing of those things. And of course, you want to make sure it's shared and public once you're finished putting together your bundle, because if it's not public, no one can see it really except you. And so that's not very helpful. So that's the bundle. The other feature I do want to mention is the search. So if you look up here on the kind of top menu, there's this little question mark, which is help. Next to it is the little magnifier, which is the search. You can make a search in there and save it, or you can search in patterns, yarns, or people and save it. So I'll give you an example that if I was a yarny of something I might want to know about. So maybe I might want to know what designers I'm interested in working with for my yarn. So I could use the pattern browser in advanced search. And let's say I have a brand new, kind of yarn. It's a little bit expensive, and I think it would be great for hats. I'm just totally making this up. I would click on accessories, hat, all hats. If I don't really care if it's for, and my yarn is bulky, so I'm going to click on bulky to see who's doing bulky stuff. If I don't care if it's crochet knitting, machine knitting, loom knitting, I'm going to leave them all open. I want to see that it's a Ravelry designer, so I know I can contact them on Ravelry. Has a photo because, otherwise I can't tell what it looks like. And then you can just say, all right, let's look through this. You could search by best match, hot right now, etc. But let's say this is your way. I would put it recently published first. You can say, hey, these people are, people on Ravelry that are designing the kind of patterns that I want to see in my yarn. I'm going to save this search. And on the top left, once you have all the search categories, you can click Save Search. You can name it. So this is Marie's Fake Search, I'm going to call it. And then you have the option, do you want to subscribe to watch for updates? Yes. So let's say anytime somebody makes a new bulky hat, you want to know. So you can say, that's a designer I want to reach out to. You can save it. And then where do they go? It says they go here in this little magnifying glass on the top menu on the right, and you can see my saved searches. Okay, and so that's an easier way if there's something you're searching for often to just go there regularly. If you're a designer, or let's say you're a maker and you are working with patterns from a couple of different designers, you basically that they give you permission to make work from them. You find their patterns are really on trend. You can always put those people in your search and you can find them every time. So that's another feature that I wanted to share. So I hope I've hopefully scratched a little bit of the surface about some of the things you can do on Ravelry. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and go back to being me. But I wanted to just kind of emphasize that it's not only the obvious things like advertising, and it's also kind of these hidden things that build a little bit more connection, because like I said, a lot of people only are thinking about their own business. They're not thinking about how it intertwines with other businesses there on Ravelry. And so if you understand kind of how, let's say, the project pages connect ultimately with the yarn, that'll give you a better idea of how to work and partner with yarn companies. If you are, let's say, a designer, or vice versa, if you're a yarn company and you want to work with a designer, how to say to them, and I really appreciate it if you could add a project when you're done, because, this is how it helps us. So I think, being clear on how things work so you can sort of share that information with other people is, I think, one of the more important things. So I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions. I know there's still a couple of viewers. I'm not sure if all the questions that people had were addressed. I know I've been talking like a a million miles a minute. So if anybody that's on the call or on the video, I guess, how do you refer to this? On anyone that's on the Hangout right now, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in. And again, the way you can find that is in your Hangout sort of screen on the far left. There is a little blue box with some lines in it, and that's where you can type. So if you click on that blue box and type in any question that you have, I'm happy to answer it. So I'm going to wait a moment here to see if anyone is typing, and then if not, I'm going to pretty much wrap up. But let me just say a couple of things as I get ready to wrap up. So first of all, you can find, I'll put some notes together, not today, but in a couple days for this episode, and you'll be able to find those at creativeyarnentrepreneur.com/44. And also, if you have questions that I didn't address today, but maybe you didn't have a time to ask or you had to step away, if you want to email me those questions, I'm happy to mention them or follow up on them in a future episode. I also want to mention that if you are not currently subscribed to the Underground Crafter mailing list, I'd really appreciate it if you could join. It's, oh, oops, did I say Underground Crafter? That's my design business, not this show. Anyway, if you're not on the Creative Yarn Entrepreneur show list, please go ahead and sign up. And you can get that at creativeyarnentrepreneur.com/list. And also, as always, if you found this helpful, I would appreciate if you would let your other friends know that have a yarn-related business, because it always helps if more people can get involved and spread the word. And that's pretty much what I'd hope for. So if there's no other questions, which it looks like there aren't, I want to thank everyone that joined me today. I know it was kind of a long time and there's a lot of things going on, but I do hope it was helpful for people. And again, if you have any further questions, do let me know. So thank you so much for joining me, and have a wonderful and creative week.